our guests today. I first will introduce myself, Samantha Hardingham. I'm the academic director at the LSA. Welcome everybody to our Thursday talks. We had a short break last week after an epic talk from Zafir Amin, who is our not only our Thursday talk coordinator, but I think that by all accounts presented an incredible talk around pay and rights at work. So I think that was sounded like a busy session. And we will look forward to meeting Amir Nouri next week, who will talk about his work with AI. So something complete, as always with Thursday Talk, something completely different. To this week, where we have the great pleasure of welcoming Child Graddon Lewis, David Kay, architect, and Georgie Herety, architect and LSA alumni, who I had the great pleasure of working with as a student. Feels like years ago now, but it probably wasn't. It's probably about 2.
Yes.
And so really, really welcome back, Georgie, to the LSA. So Child Graddon Lewis are an exemplar firm who create socially valuable projects. They're committed to making lasting positive change for the communities in which they work. Georgie, as I said, is an architectural assistant at Child Graddon Lewis, and David Kay is an architect there. Through their projects, they will outline how buildings must be designed to create safety and comfort in both the home and workplace, with human settlements planned to provide public space for healthy living, recreation and culture. I think a note has gone round to the school and Thursday Talk viewers with a comment from me, which says that this is essential viewing and listening for all students, particularly who are joining us, who are working on how to approach the design of really truly inclusive spaces in the city. I know we talk about it a lot, but what does it actually look like, and what does it actually mean to do that, both in the public and private realm? And it's also just an amazing opportunity to hear from one of our recent alumni who has, I can genuinely testify, has taken the work of their thesis project, developed that while they were at the LSA with external organizations, and then taken it out into your practice life and developing that. So questions from students around how to do that, the pitfalls. I can also testify that it's not an easy journey. Don't think it's an easy thing to do. It's not, but amazing when you work at it as hard as you did, Georgie, and where you're taking that work. So I am going to hand over to you without further ado, and look forward to listening. I will keep an eye on questions that will come in. Please all ask questions, everybody, put them in the chat, and then we'll hopefully leave a little time at the end for a bit of discussion. Okie doke, over to you both.
Great, thank you, Samantha. I'll just share our presentation. Yeah, that was a great introduction. Thank you very much. David and I are here to talk about designing for health. So as Samantha said, we work at Child Graddon Lewis Architects. We're not necessarily experts in the design of healthcare facilities, but as a team, we're really passionate about designing buildings that really truly benefit those who live, work and play in them. And so we're going to talk about the design principles that are applied to each of our projects and how they're fundamental in creating healthy spaces. So again, I'm Georgie, graduated from LSA a couple of years ago now, been working at CGL for 1 year, and before that working at both ends of the spectrum in terms of practice size, but always focusing on accessibility in practice, and later specialising in the design for neurodivergent users, which is something that I explored through my thesis project, Atypical City, which proposed sensory interventions in public spaces that are designed for neurotypical users on the whole, and just exploring how neurodivergent people experience the city in completely different and extremely interesting ways, and just trying to kind of foster socio-spatial inclusion, because a lot of these spaces that we love to engage with in the city are completely inaccessible for people with different sensory needs. My work started when I joined Artbox, which is a social enterprise and provides support and workspace for neurodivergent artists in the city. And that kind of lived experience really, I feel, enriched the project. And it was just a great experience in terms of kind of practicing genuine community engagement when you're designing for a user group. They provide a lot of feedback that kind of makes you realise your biases when designing space. So yeah, great organisation, and would recommend checking them out if you have some spare time.
Okay, my name's David. I'll give you a brief introduction to who I am. I've been at Child Graddon Lewis for over 8 years now. I actually first joined as a part 1, and they've supported me through part-time working during my part 2, and then through my part 3. And here I am today, really excited to talk to all of you. This slide here, just it's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek project that I did as part of my MA, which was Queer Public Convenience Supplementary Planning Document, mock-up of a sort of Islington Council planning document. But the emphasis of this was looking at how our urban realm and public realm is designed in a very heteronormative way, and looking at how we could use this idea of queering our public realm and public spaces to make them more accessible to all groups, people from different protected characteristics. I also have an interest in sort of other research projects. So this is part of a research team that I'm currently involved with, or have been for the last 10 years, called Cultural Geometries, where we have been working with a marble quarry in Portugal. We've been back and forth up to 10 times working with them, looking at the both the environmental but also the socio-political and economic impacts of the marble quarrying industries in Portugal, looking at how this sort of product of luxury and excess actually comes from a place where you're getting 80% waste material, and looking how we can better utilise that material to have less waste. But alongside that, it's about making sure that we are working with the whole supply chain and being involved with the communities that form that critical part of the local economy, and they're sort of the whole of the local series of towns are supported by these series of marble quarries. One of the great things that we found was we first came in and wanted to go and work with them, and they were very sort of cautious of us, a little bit confused by why these bunch of young architects from London wanted to swan in and see what they're doing, digging stone out of the ground. But over the visits, we started to build not only their trust, but also their support and their friendship. And it was sort of culminated in one of our 5th or 6th visits, where we were sat in the town square, and so the waiter brought us over a bottle of wine and said, "No, we didn't buy this." And the waiter explained, "No, actually, those guys over there have bought you this bottle. They wanted to say thanks for all you're doing." So really trying to be part of that whole supply chain of looking at this marble quarry process. And this is a marble pavilion that we've built out of waste material. The next stage of this project is we're looking at how we can start to develop British standards and ways in which that we can utilise waste marble as a contemporary building material. So we're looking at how it might be possible to build a British standard or a European standard to apply this as a contemporary modern building material within our future architectural projects. And it's a final research project for me. This is Instant Cities, which is, I thought, relevant to the theme of designing for health. It was published in a book by Melanie Dodd called Spatial Practices. And it was part of a group of us from my part 2 at Central St Martin's, where we were looking at the complexities and layers that go into building public and urban realms, but also this idea of Glastonbury Festival being this instant city that pops up for a week every year, unless it's a fallow year, where 250,000 people descend on this farm, and really looking at how you have the layers of governance, infrastructure and culture, what they bring, how they come together, and how that's both socially and economically responsible, but also the impacts and things that have an impact on your health, such as waste disposal, water points, sort of really fundamental and quite physical, tangible elements of urban design. So that's a brief introduction to me. I'll pass you back to Georgie.
Okay, so onto the body of the talk. We're all aware that architecture and health are inseparable, from the design of hospitals and places for healing to strategic design of infrastructure and city planning. Architecture directly affects physical and mental health of individuals and communities. And as overwhelmingly urban dwellers, we're thought to spend an average of around 90% of our time indoors. How can we ensure that the spaces in which we spend our lives are not detrimental to our health?
So when we talk about designing for health or healthy buildings, we're not talking, as Georgie mentioned, about us being the best in terms of healthcare designers for hospitals and clinics and dentists and things like that. We're more talking about this holistic approach to design. So a healthy building being one that puts the human, physical, mental and social health at its heart. Ultimately, by creating a healthy building, we require this approach that considers and incorporates everything from air quality to the creation of safe streets and public realm and public spaces. When we have healthy buildings and healthy built environments, it's beneficial for everyone. So it's not just for people that are neurotypical or heteronormative. And I think when we consider that there's a limited understanding of physical attributes needed for occupant well-being, that often has a huge impact on national healthcare costs. So if we can design healthier buildings, we're actually going to have a better society from it.
So as a practice, we've formulated a set of design principles that kind of guide our thinking around the creation of truly healthy buildings and spaces. The principles are born out of first and second hand research, but also, and arguably most importantly, feedback from users of our projects.
I mean, ultimately, these design principles are quite self-explanatory, but just to go through them all in brief before we look at some case studies. When we talk about affordability, we're not just talking about can people afford to buy or rent somewhere, but it's also can people afford to live in those spaces? Have we designed efficiently to keep bills and costs down for users? Accessibility, this is for all protected characteristics. It's not just physical health and physical disability. Obviously, that is really important, but it's also looking at neurodiversity, people from different ethnic backgrounds, different religions, etc., etc. In terms of flexibility, I think something that's increasingly pressing is future-proofing our projects, making sure we have space for adaptation, and there's some really exciting projects that have emerged recently where that has been at the heart of the design approach. Quality, I mean, quality both in terms of aesthetics, yes, but making sure that our buildings have really decent lifespans and they provide good quality living spaces within them, light and fresh air and things like that. Activation, so is the proposed use appropriate for this building? Is it in the right place for it? And how are we going to activate those spaces, particularly things like ground floor planes and active frontages where we have a public realm? Is it accessible to all? Do we have areas where people don't feel safe or don't feel comfortable? That kind of ties into locality and making sure that we are building and proposing buildings for the right locations. Should we be looking far more at building over major transport hubs to provide effectively and sort of sensibly located new housing? The idea of the 15-minute city, which I know has been almost manipulated by some negative press and politics, but this idea of actually, yeah, you want to have those key services where you are located and where you're living. And that ties into the next point of community, but also within the community, it's about bringing the community forward as one of the key stakeholders when we develop designs and making sure that engagement with the community is meaningful and purposeful and not just lip service. And then finally, climatic, which ties into a series of the previous points, but we're not just designing buildings that are sustainable to use, but also buildings that are sustainable in their material choices and also that they have been designed to cope with the changing environments that we're having to navigate at the moment, and they provide relevant ventilation, shading, protection from changing climate change.
And so to speak to each of those principles, we've put together a set of case studies, CGL's current projects and relatively recently completed projects. And each of these kind of pick up on a variety of the principles that we just outlined. The first being the NMA, which is the National COVID Memorial for the National Memorial Arboretum in Staffordshire. The proposal encompasses 2 pavilion buildings and is set within a brand new woodland. The pavilions will act as an entrance gateway, cafe and multi-purpose place of reflection. And the architecture was designed to provide opportunities for quiet contemplation and also to blend into the surrounding environment. The material palette and use of local craft enhances its direct connection to nature and the neighbouring communities, and the design follows a thoughtful biophilic approach to provide a healing experience, a place to recover from trauma and to connect with oneself, the community and nature.
So this project is Westmead. This is a project that I'm currently working on the construction stages for, and I was working on planning during lockdown, during that strange time of having to work completely remotely. Westmead is 65 unit or flat scheme in Westminster, sort of near Notting Hill, and it's designed to Passivhaus design principles. So it's really about creating homes that are energy efficient and fit for its users. Interestingly, it was originally designed as a mixed tenure scheme where there was cross-subsidy of private sale flats that would subsidise the social rented units within the project. When Westminster Council changed from a Conservative council to Labour, it's decided that it was going to change the tenure completely to 100% affordable. And I think that opens up some really interesting questions about the way in which our building tenure works, and whether it was a good decision or not. Are we creating segregation between different socioeconomic groups by doing that? Is it better to have a more diverse mix of people living in buildings? And also, are we limiting the amount of homes that we can build because we don't have that cross-subsidy in terms of funding strategy for new homes that we originally had? So we're now kind of completely dependent on additional GLA funding to get this project built. I think the idea of Passivhaus, which I'm sure people are familiar with, but it's a very controlled way of managing things like airflow, but also having incredibly high U values, triple glazing throughout, which I think is becoming far more commonplace. Interestingly, we're talking to window manufacturers at the moment where they're saying there's no cost increase to making windows triple glazed. So I feel like double glazing is going to feel like a thing of the past very soon. But there's also questions health-wise about the control of air within Passivhaus buildings. And there's a nursery in Hungary that one of our colleagues shared with us, where there was actually criticism that the carefully cleaned and controlled air wasn't giving children and toddlers and people that go to nursery schools enough exposure to the sorts of pollution and bacteria and stuff that they need to build robust immune systems. So I think there's a really interesting question about, are we designing for health? Are we exceeding sort of appropriate levels of pollution that actually benefit our health in the long run? This is St Leonard's Court. This is a similar project in as much as it's a designed and actually built as a mixed tenure scheme across town in Hoxton. So for Hackney Council, then became a joint venture between Hackney Council and Countryside, who are a house builder client. And I think increasingly we're seeing our local authority clients partnering with house builders to develop their schemes. I think it gives local authorities a bit more reassurance that they can guarantee that their schemes are built, and it does encourage these mixed tenure schemes to work more productively. And it's a fantastic photograph of some of the residents sat within the roof terrace, residents that used to live on the site, and they were able to get first choice of flats to move back in this sort of green oasis. Location wise, it's about 3 minutes walk away from Old Street Station, but it's this sort of crazy garden space. And actually this connection with nature has been really critical in the success of the scheme. So we've got 3 different roof terraces. We've also got a large courtyard garden, communal courtyard garden. And the other thing we've got is these deck accesses, which you can see the resident wearing red on the right-hand side. Deck accesses have historically been very popular. You see it a lot in sort of 20th century architecture, but in the last decade or two, they've been very unpopular, particularly with house builders, because they have this connotation of some of the failed post-war estates. I think we've moved beyond that, and I think that's a good thing, because actually the benefits of deck access are fantastic. Compared to a double stack corridor, you're going to get fantastic ventilation, because you can have through ventilation from the front to the back of the building, providing more fresh air. But you also have opportunities for healthy communities to develop within the projects. So these deck accesses are where neighbours will meet. They'll sort of have informal conversations. They'll get to know each other far more than when you're in a corridor that you don't want to hang around in, because you've got 1.2 meters worth of space either side of you and no natural light.
So on to Dudley House, which is another project for Westminster, who have actually initiated an inclusive city for all programme, and I think Dudley House is acting as a kind of blueprint for what they want to provide across the borough. It's made up of intermediate housing and a 9-storey secondary school. And for those that aren't familiar with intermediate housing, it recognises the need for housing for people who are ineligible for social housing, but earn modest wages and are working in the city centre, with residents paying living rent rather than social rent. The scheme occupies a relatively small footprint, but is providing affordable homes and community infrastructure. The benefits of the scheme, the benefits of the intergenerational nature of the scheme of what's made it a real success, as well as just the quality of the spaces and especially the activation of the street scene with incorporation of health infrastructure, making these facilities much more accessible to the residents of the project, but also the wider community. And so just ensuring and encouraging the client includes these types of facilities and really pushing for the appropriate uses at ground floor can really make a scheme success. And then onto a much smaller, more light touch project, which is Saltholme Poolside in the northeast of England, and it's a refurbishment of what was a dilapidated bird hide in a nature reserve with very little visitors, and as you can see from the photo, there's kind of this juxtaposition of the building within this wetland and its light touch approach with what is this really heavy Teesside industrial kind of facilities to the north. And the client for this project was the RSPB, and they have said despite the low cost of the project, it's had a huge impact because accessibility was at the heart of the scheme, and so they've seen the numbers of visitors massively increase, meaning that they can roll out their education services far beyond what they had originally imagined, and it's helping to support their saving nature strategy, and it's also just a really lovely place to visit and engage with nature.
So this project is Woolwhich, and I think this is probably an example of quite a traditional designing for health type of project. This project's a joint venture between the house builder Hill, who I'm sure you'll have seen their hoardings across London, and also Greenwich Council. But it's also a collaboration between CGL and Fortner Brown's Architects. and also our landscape architect who developed the public realm elements of the scheme. Ultimately, the scheme is formed of sort of three parts. You've got this large state-of-the-art leisure centre with various different swimming pools and sports facilities. You've got residential to the rear that sort of sits adjacent to the existing residential areas, and then the public realm that worked really hard to integrate the two. And what the scheme does is it has to sort of bridge the gap between the very civic of General Gordon Square and the civic town centre of Woolwhich, and the very residential that is actually very close by. The scheme itself is providing 482 new homes of mixed tenure, of which some of them will be taken on by the council as social rented, but we're also providing private sale and shared ownership. So it's that hybrid of social homes, intermediate homes and private sale homes. The leisure centre itself is going to be replacing a dilapidated and pretty much end of its functional life leisure centre that's located nearby on the riverside. And what it's doing is it's bringing these top quality facilities into an area of London with a really large catchment area. So as well as the swimming pools, you've got a brand new state-of-the-art gym, you've got squash courts and the rooftop games pitches and things like that. And it's going to be ran by GLL, who run Better Gym. So it's not going to be a private gym like a David Lloyd or something like that. It's going to be a community gym. We then got behind it what we're calling the community square. And this space is working really hard to try and integrate the community into what will be a bunch of new residents and what is a very sort of proud and established community within Woolwich. We're utilising the existing pub building called the Bull Tavern building to create a new community hub, what's been sort of dubbed the neighbour hub. And that's going to work really hard in working as both a meeting space, a place for sort of working from home, but also as a sort of key touch point for the whole community. So it's like a community centre plus, I guess is the way to describe it. It also means that we're retaining the one of the few heritage buildings, but actually enhancing it with an extension to the rear. This building here, cut off here, is the Sikh temple, and this space here, just adjacent to the leisure centre, is the Tramshed Theatre. And part of the whole planning design process was engaging with those two key cultural and community groups to help them with the activation of the public realm and the wider scheme. So we've been working really hard with Tramshed Theatre to see how they can utilise the public realm of the site. So they're seeing opportunities within the central garden to have an outdoor stage that they can put on performances. I mean, what Tramshed does is a great deal of outreach, particularly for young people and people from less fortunate backgrounds, to give them something to work towards and an activity to engage with. They're looking at this as an opportunity to be the backdrop to their cultural carnivals and festivals as well. So it's really about that idea of locality, that idea of activation, all those sort of key design points that we flagged at the start of this presentation. And then
on to, again, a much smaller scale project, but quite a fun one. So this project is St John's, and it's the refurbishment of C of E Church, with the sole aim of making the space much more accessible for the local community, but also for the neighbouring primary school. And so the main interventions were to provide level access, brighten the space, and just the pews were also removed. So we've got quite an ambitious client on this project, and also maybe brave by the light choice, but also by the fact that they're not afraid to kind of challenge the traditional layout of the church. And they're also looking to the next phase of this project open up this space where the projector currently sits, to provide a much more welcoming and better situated entrance to the church. As you can see, this project also had community engagement at its heart, and it's provided for a really active intergenerational space, and that came partly from the design team encouraging the client to really properly and robustly programme the space. So to think about activities that maybe they hadn't considered before, and therefore welcoming new groups to into the church and to engage with its activities and space.
So Harrow Road is another scheme for Westminster. We don't just work with Westminster, but we have a really good working relationship with Westminster. Similar to Westmead, it was changed to 100% affordable and raised those similar questions about whether we want mixed tenure schemes or fully affordable schemes. But it's providing 112 affordable residential units, brand new nursery, a new community centre, a cafe, and also a startup office space. So it's a really truly mixed use scheme. We've actually just come back from a site visit this morning. They've just PC'd and handed over the homes back to the council. So there'll be residents moving in very soon, and they're just finishing up the last few bits in the commercial elements of the building. The scheme itself sits quite tightly within a dense estate that was with a very sort of proud and established community already located there. And I think one of the key elements for us as designers is to think of existing communities as our clients. So whilst, yes, of course, the council is our client, ultimately the people that currently live there and that are going to live there are our end user clients. So it was really important to bring them along with us on the journey to genuinely listen to and appreciate and use their hyper-local knowledge and experience of the area and of the site to inform and improve our designs, and not only during the planning stages, but also throughout construction phases to ensure that they were kept on board and they were supportive of our project. We did face challenges from people like Secured by Design, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with, which is a branch of the police who their sole aim is to make safer streets, but actually they've often failed to see the bigger picture of, yes, a 2-metre fence might stop someone getting into somewhere, but it's also going to create unpleasant streets to engage with. So trying to balance working with different authorities and bodies to ensure that we don't just design to one or another expected standard. And engaging with nature, again, it's an urban site, so we are really limited into what we do, but we have protected all of the trees that are on site and wherever possible introduced new trees and green spaces. I don't think we can ever make green oases a guarantee within our urban schemes, but we always push to try and enhance the public realm and landscaping across our schemes.
And another good example of that is Peel Place in South Kilburn. So this project forms the heart of a huge master plan for Brent Council. And this part of the master plan in particular has health right at its centre, because the council have engaged with the NHS in providing community health infrastructure that allows them to do what's called social prescribing, which some of you may be familiar with, but for those who aren't, healthcare workers, rather than prescribing medication, will now increasingly start to prescribe social activities and active activities to kind of help alleviate the stresses on the NHS that stem from things like social isolation and obesity. And so this scheme was one that we inherited from another architect, but CGL kind of looked at the positive elements of that scheme and started again. And so the increase in efficiencies in the flat allowed CGL to kind of argue that these efficiencies, yes, could save money and it could be used as profit, or we could increase the amount of housing on the site and we could provide appropriate uses at ground floor. And so initially there wasn't these kind of healthy infrastructure embedded in the project, but now there's going to be a healthcare facility and a community arts centre, and so some patients will be prescribed time at the community arts centre to kind of increase social engagement. And yeah, so it's a holistically very healthy project, and we're excited to take it to the next stages.
So then Victoria Wharf, this is a scheme developed by a housing association in Westminster for key workers, and the idea was to provide homes for key workers that work within the borough so that they weren't displaced from the communities that they engage with. The scheme itself was actually on a really, really tight budget, and we had to do something that was also appropriate given the site on the canal and its prominence, that was deemed to have enough design quality to get through the planning process, which isn't always the easiest of things when you've got very little to play with. One of the ways around that is we engaged with brick suppliers to use 2 of the cheapest bricks that they had and then mix them up to get this perception of this more textured and varied brick finish that you can see here. Also trying to introduce some joy into buildings, and by dropping these subtle hints of colour, people have a little bit more personality in their homes, a bit more character. And I think there is sometimes a tendency that buildings, particularly in London with this sort of new London vernacular, to be very biscuit brown and quite boring. And I'm not saying that we don't also design those buildings, so I'm careful not to be too critical. But also this building falls under the really important point of flexibility. So you can see on the right-hand side that blank brick wall, that was intentionally left blank to future-proof the scheme. And if you were to go and visit the scheme now, you'll see there's a second Victoria Wharf built alongside it, effectively doubling the number of homes that we have provided on the site. It's sort of that essential element of both accessibility, flexibility and activation, and keeping people within their locality.
Yeah, so that's the end of our kind of case studies, but we did want to labour the point that engagement and fostering a sense of ownership for each of these projects really kind of makes or breaks the scheme, and just ensuring that if you are to work, especially on large scale schemes, that you really prioritise meaningful community engagement, that you partner with organisations that have existing relationships with the communities that you're working within. You can kind of approach these communities yourself, and that can work, but it always helps to engage with it's a discipline of its own, and so it's always best to try and engage with existing organisations if they are available. And it doesn't necessarily mean kind of town hall meetings, but if there are existing social organisations within the locality that you're working, approaching them and just having some building relationships with who is going to use this.
I think this is a brief slide just touching on standards. I think standards are a really interesting sort of touch point, because often standards are seen as a bare minimum, and whilst yes, that is important because you often can't trust particularly house builder clients to want to spend money on things that are maybe like critical in the success and of a healthy and successful building. Having a standard in place at least means that you're meeting sort of baseline level of whatever it might be covering. So things like Have and Teg is a fantastic resource for designing wheelchair-friendly homes. It's a much more easily accessible document than Part M42, Part M43, the building regs that ultimately we have to comply to. But things like TfL Healthy Street indicators and the UK government's Safer Places indicators, they're not perfect, but they're trying to better the public realm that we are engaging with every day and that we're designing towards. The Healthy Streets indicators, they sound pretty sort of self-explanatory or common sense, but writing it down, you're almost holding people to account to meet them. So they include things like ensuring streets make everyone feel welcome, that they're easy to cross, they provide shelter and shade, that there are places for people to stop and rest. That's particularly important for potentially people with limited mobility or older people. That streets aren't always too noisy, and there's options and encouragement for people to walk and cycle. People feeling safe on their streets, which ties back to that idea of secure by design and things like that. There's also that they're interesting, there's things to see and do, but also that they're providing clean air. I think there's a lot, obviously, recently in the news with the expansion of ULEZ and trying to clean up our public, our built environment through limiting the amount of pollution that gets pumped into our air and consequently our lungs. And Sadiq Khan's done a lot on that. Things like Sport England, trying to embed active design and active living into the way in which we design our built environments and our master plans. Design for adults and later living, and also dementia-friendly design is one of the things that's recently come up with some of our local authority work. Is you have to embed dementia-friendly design principles from day one, from stage 0, stage 1. They include having appropriate signage and lighting, but also ensuring that when you do have floor finishes, that they're not going to be inaccessible to someone that may perceive a contrast in floor finish as a hole in the floor that they can't cross. Having appropriate navigation, things like that, and also seating, which again, such a simple thing but so often gets forgotten. The Healthy Homes Bill is actually an effort by the government to try and embed some of these principles, so climatic, privacy, rest, sustenance, hygiene, play, community care, ageing and interconnected, all into legislation as to how we design. So yeah, whilst there are clearly questions about the value or impact that regulations and standards have, I think there is a place for them, and it'd be interesting to discuss that further. Georgie, did you want to pick up on Well and Neuro?
Yeah, so the Well building, much like Passivhaus, is a certification for a healthy building. But what's interesting about Well is that it's only certified after proven performance in operation, rather than on submission of design paperwork. And so, yeah, thinking about stage 7 and how the building actually functions, lessons learned from practical completion. And then a standard that publicly available standard 6463, which it doesn't sound very appealing, but it's a really interesting document around designing for neurodiversity. I would argue that it is a very accessible standard, and it's something that I fed into during my time at the LSA, and it's great to see that it's now out there and it's a step in the right direction. It's by no means perfect, but yeah, an interesting read. Then we've just given a bit of further reading that isn't based on standards, but more so just in lived experience, and so a few books that we've enjoyed, and that is us.
Great, thank you so much, both of you, for a fascinating tour of London. Actually, incredible amount of work that you're undertaking right under our noses, which is just, I mean, it's incredibly optimistic, I think, to think that amount of thinking and ambition is going into so many schemes. So congratulations for that, and congratulations to your clients and the bodies that are sort of trying to forge ahead with all of this work. It's really impressive. I think there was a time not very long ago when we were, the schemes, lots of the schemes that you were talking about, particularly where you've got incredible amounts of mixed use, what were called sort of hybrid schemes almost at one point in architectural terms, are norm. I mean, they're being built and commissioned and built, and there's incredible value coming from those schemes. The idea of schools and homes and all of those sort of pretty conflicting criteria often. The stuff of just the imagination, really a part of the way London will be. Also parts of it. So I just think that's incredibly inspiring. So thank you. I have a number of questions, so I'm going to go straight to them because we have about 10 minutes left. So if you're happy to try to answer some of these, that would be terrific.
Yeah.
I think, Georgie, you mentioned, I think the first one really, you've touched on it just right at the end of the talk, but One of our audience asks, have you been able to bring any ideas and knowledge you gained from your masters into the practice and projects? You talked a little bit about that part N.
Yes, definitely. So in terms of the practice itself, it's really aspirational in being kind of forward thinking in terms of designing for neurodivergent groups. We actually have a client who we can't disclose, but is a very ambitious client. It kind of restores my faith a little bit that they are actively looking to design workspace for neurodivergent users because they want to attract them into the workplace. And so they have engaged with us to start the initial stages of a design for an exemplary workspace for neurodivergent users and what that looks like. And so, yes, having looked to define the principles before the pass was publicly available, kind of forming those principles myself and working to them has definitely come to fruition there. And I think that it will be a fantastic project because there are real interventions that one can make to make a space much more accessible for different sensory needs. So yeah, people are definitely recognising the importance of it and championing it, and it's really great to see.
And we're also working to try, hopefully work with a major infrastructure client. We do a lot of infrastructure work within our retail team, who we didn't really touch on today, but actually we went in to a bid with them that Georgie was part of the team of. And whilst, yeah, we could bring our experience of working on major infrastructure major infrastructure locations, Georgie really was able to bring that extra level of neurodivergent design, sorry, I pronounced that wrong, neurodiverse design and designing for health. And I think it really helped us to stand out and also raised a lot of questions to that potential client as to whether they're really touching all bases that they need to for inclusive design in their various large, I can't say who it is, various large locations.
Yeah, and I think that the thing is that has proved true, which I was kind of questioning during my masters, is whether that looking into that world of designing for neurodivergent benefits everybody. And it's definitely rang true that every single intervention that's kind of been posed to clients or within a project has ended up being beneficial to everyone who would be using that space. So yeah.
Interesting. I mean, I just recall elements of what that work meant, and I think a lot of there was a whole sequence of work. I mean, we look at the projects as you presented them from a certain distance, but a lot of that, an understanding of what it meant to design for that particular area meant really getting up quite close and figuring out how do you intervene, at what level do you at what scale do you intervene, what does that look and feel like, and developing drawings that could start to kind of reflect a different way of experiencing the city. I did a tiny bit about that, what it meant to try to kind of explore that, because it felt, I remember very clearly at the time, a sort of slightly out of control process. But
that's very polite of you, Samantha. I think I got lost at points in a lot of it is in the detail, and so get lost at points in small corners of the building that can provide sensory relief or sensory deprivation. And so I think taking a step back probably would have been very beneficial, and thinking of these things on a larger scale, which I'm doing in practice, as opposed to looking at the tiny details and getting lost in those. But I think that there can be those interventions at any scale. So
no, it was good. It was a necessary exploration.
It
was very interesting.
Got me somewhere.
What you do. Yeah, no, I think it incredible. Now I will keep going with questions so we don't miss any out. Social value is an increasingly prominent aspect in applications and bidding criteria. Would CGL ever consider doing consultancy for other practices and companies? That sounds
That is a great question.
like a pitch.
Yeah, I don't think I have the decision making on that, but I think that's something that we'd love to do. I mean, we really do embed social values in the way in which we work, both outward facing to clients and communities, but also internally with the way in which we work, and underpinning all of what we do. We've got a diversity and inclusion group who are developing a manifesto, which is intended to be a working document that stays that forms both an internal document but also an outward facing document that we constantly develop and work across the built environment sector, not just architects, but actually working with our clients, working with the contractors, working with communities. Increasingly, contractors are asking us to input into their social value targets and goals. So I know that Georgie's got a real passion for utilising our volunteering hours that we're allocated as every single member of staff, and that's feeding into some of the work we're doing with our clients. I think you probably expand on that further, Georgie.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's, but not that this is me consulting anybody, because I'm by no means an expert, but I think it starts with the way in which you work as a practice, and it kind of goes from there, because once you prioritising that within the practice, then it starts to play out in the clients that you're working with, who will be driving that forwards. So in terms of consultation, I mean, CGL has many arms, and so I can't see us ever saying no to anything, really.
Great, thank you. In your tenure blind schemes, do you have variations in specification internally, i.e. what on finishes, fixtures, spec for private? Sorry, one for finishes, fixtures, spec for private, and one for social rent.
It really depends on who our client is ultimately. Ideally, everyone has exactly the same homes. In reality, we don't always have a say over that. So, for example, the project that we saw today, Harrow Road, when that was a tenure blind scheme, all of the common spaces, whether it be the affordable only block, the mixed block, or the private sale block, they all had exactly the same communal areas in terms of fixtures and finishes. Internally, the ERs varied. That wasn't our decision. We did an interior design package for the whole scheme, and the council came back based on costs with variations to that. And sorry, I didn't catch the other half of the question, unless
I think you've covered it really. It's
okay.
The difference between whether private and social rent, whether you have distinct one for one set and one for another, I think.
Yeah, I mean, yes, our goal is to have no difference, but ultimately we don't always have the final say in that.
Great. Now, in our last 5 minutes, we have a couple of questions from the studio where there is a mic. So I am going to, this is an experiment. We've not done this before. Hopefully this will work. 2 questions. Esma is ready, apparently, with her question.
Is it working?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. I have 2 questions. Sorry, the 2 questions were from me, but I think maybe does anyone else? No. Okay. 2 questions. First one is. First one is I'm wondering if you look into any circadian lighting, whether that's specified in any of the projects. And if not, do you know or are you aware of any projects that do that? And secondly, the Saltholme Poolside Wetlands Centre, what do the foundations on that look like? And is it flood? I mean, I'm assuming it is flood proof, / how did you achieve that? Could you talk a bit more about that? Thank you.
Thanks,
Sorry,
Brenda.
what was the type of lighting? That's my sorry.
Circadian lighting. So looking at like the frequencies of light and what sort of lighting we're naturally supposed to be, frequencies of light we're supposed to be exposed to throughout the day. And
yeah, so that has been, we're now working to pass 6463, and that has been specified as part of that guidance. And so, yeah, all of our projects will be from now on, kind of. I'm not aware of any projects in the office that specifically looked at that. But if you want me to have a look and get back to you and send over any project information around that, I definitely can. But yeah, it's in the past, and so it will be specified from now.
And in terms of the pool's height, I'm not sure completely because it was my colleague Danny that worked on that, but we worked very hard with our structural engineers who were plus and minus on that to have both a really light touch on the site, but I'm sure that the impact of the wetlands environment will have driven the approach to that. So I can get back to you and send something across with more details on that.
Thank you.
Extremely generous, and thank you very much for picking that up. We are coming to a close. I don't know whether we've got any more hands raised in the studio. I will do one last check because there's a hand up, but if I don't hear anything back, I will assume we are, everyone has asked everything they'd like to ask. I'd just like to say thanks again to you both, David and Georgie, for joining us. Fascinating talk, amazing work. I hope you'll come in and visit us in the real and see our space very soon.
Yeah, that's great.
Great. Look forward to seeing you, and welcome everybody back next week, where we will welcome Amir Nouri, who will talk about his work with AI, also an LSA alumnus,
Yeah.
and for something very different. So
Yes.
look forward to then, and thanks again both.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Good luck.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.